Testing 1, 2, 3 testing. Welcome, survivors. This is Eerie Night of the Pseudo Posse, and today we are focusing on her, the screaming she-devil herself. Veterans of the game may have noticed she is easier to spawn, and new players, well, you guys don't have a frame of reference, but trust me, they spawn more frequently. And how do they spawn? Without getting into the nitty-gritty of it, screamers are spawned in when the heat within a given chunk reaches a certain threshold. Things that increase the heat level are related to player activity, running forges, the workbench, dew collectors even, and of course, making any noise like shooting, harvesting. Pretty much, you do something, it raises the heat reaches maximum, screamer spawns, ruins your day. Since we cannot stop the inevitability, assuming no mods are at play, how can we design a base that is screamer-proof? To answer that question, we're going to conduct a series of experiments and science the shit out of this. And spoiler alert, the results were rather surprising. Our first goal is to determine what blocks prevent her from simply seeing us. That sounds like a self-obvious question. Just use a solid block. Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but it would appear the screamer has a similar set of X-ray eyeballs like the cops do and can see through certain blocks despite them being solid. If you haven't watched our cop spit video, go check that out after finishing this one if you struggle with cop spit and are looking for spit safe blocks. Now, instead of rehashing the previous cop spit block test setup, I decided to ramp it up a notch and created this whole thing here. Yeah, I hated myself by the end of that, but I did it all for you guys so you don't have to. Because testing every block would test the limits of my sanity and yours, I mercifully limited the number of blocks to 39, 13 per each block category tested: square, round, and wedge. Chosen blocks are completely solid and are blocks I've used previously in other builds or might conceivably use in the future. Basically, I tried to make it representative of blocks that I or others might consider using in a typical base build. Hopefully, we can determine a pattern to easily identify what blocks are safe and which are not. So let's get to it, shall we? First, let's establish the control of our experiment. If we spawn the screamer right in front of us, direct line of sight, she immediately sees me and starts to rage scream. Expected behavior. Like with cops, I think it is safe to assume the full cube will completely break line of sight, so maneuvering ourselves behind a cube wall gives us that exact result. She aimlessly wanders around, not able to see us at all. We see the same thing with the 3/4 cube shape, which makes sense as it is only slightly narrower than the full cube. However, the cube half is apparently just thin enough to make the screamer see through solid matter, so this one isn't safe. Interestingly, the centered variant of the cube half, keep in mind, the same block thickness, is apparently lined with lead. The screamer is completely oblivious to our presence. As we continue to get more narrow, we see the same trend. As we move from the cube 1/4 meter all the way down to plate, all of them are not screamer safe, except again for the centered variant of a block, this time the plate centered, which is an extremely thin block, yet screamers cannot see through it. Simply amazing. The rest of the blocks in this category are not surprising. These shapes are corner variants of thick blocks and are thus safe. And also not surprisingly, the sheet is very much not safe. That wraps up our square block shape test. How does our selected shapes from the wedge category fare? Pretty well actually. Aside from the pillar shape, which has very narrow gaps between blocks when placed side by side, and the half-length pillar because reasons, everything else worked. Even the cube 1/4 5 meter round, cube 5 meter round shape, and 7 meter round shape, and 1/4 7 meter round shapes worked, which are thinner than the half-length pillar. Again, reasons. The log wall O2, logs half O2, about the same thickness as the half-length pillar, also worked. Go figure. The other shapes like the pillar 1 meter 6-way, cube half pole 1 meter bottom, the tube 3 meter shapes, cube 3 meter round, and the cube corner round are all thicker, so they get the Eerie stamp of approval. The last category we tested, round shapes, were also pretty interesting. Shapes like the ramp 6 meter, and ramp 8 meter shapes, which worked with cops, are also screamer safe. Surprisingly, the wedge narrow shapes did not work despite being thicker than some of the wedge ramp variants. I guess the wedge narrows can't be good at everything. The only other shape that didn't work was the slope plate, which does fit the trend of being way too narrow. Otherwise, everything else consistently blocked the screamer line of sight, which includes the cube half ramp tip, ramp wedge 60 incline, cable inverted half, cable inverted 1/4, and cable inverted deep. And last but not least, the ramp incline. Here's the compiled results for all the tests with the block name and pass-fail grade. Feel free to pause the video to note any specific blocks you may want to use for your base build. Now, what does this all mean? It's hard to find a definitive pattern of determining whether a random shape is safe or not. Obviously, anything with holes is a no-go. Anything too narrow, like plate variants of any shape category, is also not functional. Though, there does seem to be an exception for centered variants, as we saw the cube half-centered and plate-centered shapes working despite the normal variants failing. I wouldn't call that a definitive rule, though that does give hope to other centered shapes out there. Otherwise, in general, thicker is better, though there are again exceptions to the rule, with some fairly wide blocks failing while relatively narrower blocks passing. All that being said, there is actually a decent variety of shapes you can use in building a screamer-proof base. Now you might be thinking at this juncture, video done. Let's call it a wrap. But hold the phone. We are completionists here, and there is still some more important questions to answer. Enter testing phase 2, the range test. Up till now, we've placed a screamer in front of a wall and quietly stood behind, waiting to see if she'd notice us. However, when you're in your base, you won't be standing idly. You'll be moving, jumping potentially, and opening and closing storage chests, an endless pastime. And despite being behind a wall, that noise can attract attention. So that leads us to our next question. How far away will the screamer hear us? We'll use this test setup to answer that very question. The numbers correspond to the distance away from our wall, made of cube blocks, which we have already proven to break screamer line of sight. In between each number are bars where we place a screamer to ensure she is the appropriate distance from us. The test wouldn't be complete without a noisemaker, so I have these two chests that I will open and close to grab her attention. Let's begin. I don't think it's necessary to test every single range increment, so let's start with 3 meters. And no surprise, she immediately reacted to the first sign of noise and promptly rushed our position. Same thing at 6 meters and 9. At 13 meters, we need to work a bit harder, but if we hyper spam the storage unit, we can get her attention. I don't want to make any assumptions as to how you all do inventory management, but we need to assume the worst case scenario. So this isn't good enough. Similar story at 14 meters. Though I did try a bit harder to get her attention. And at 15, that's encouraging. Let's reset and try again. Okay, third time's the charm? It would appear so. It seems we have our answer. Roughly 15 blocks is the minimum distance from the source of noise to the location of the screamer. Hold on, what about other types of noise? Well, simply moving and jumping also passes the 15-meter test. Accessing a production station like the Forge also passes. The only thing that doesn't work is of course using a noisy gun. That being said, if you are standing around home doing crafting and inventory management, I feel like you probably aren't pumping bullets into all of your valuable loot with reckless abandon. And if you are shooting zombies around your base, that means you are exposed anyhow, and not screamer safe. So I think it is safe to keep the 15 block minimum. Alright, we are almost done, but we have one more question we need to answer. Will wall thickness have any effect on reducing the screamer's hearing range? In this simple test, we add some additional wall layers. The numbers on top of the wall correlate to the number of extra walls added, which will reduce the position on the range test by 3. So 15 meters from the previous test will equate to 12 meters in this next test. So let's plop the screamer immediately down at number 12, which again is equivalent to the same 15 meter distance from the noise source. And upon spamming the storage chest once again, we don't grab her attention, which is expected given the previous test. Let's try shortening her distance by 1 meter and reset. Unfortunately, wall thickness appears to have zero effect on her hearing ability and is drawn to our position like a moth towards a flame. Not the result I was hoping for, but at least I can save you all a bunch of materials from making your walls extra thick. Armed with this information, how can we build an effective base? Since we have plenty of blocks to choose from, that isn't the major constraint. Our main concern is meeting the 15 meter threshold. Now you could build a large wall or moat around your base, though that doesn't guarantee every point within the base meets the range requirement, especially if you're on the border of the wall. Now building 15 plus meters above or below ground will better guarantee that every part of your base meets the constraint. Though the change in terrain elevation can screw with that, so you'd want to ensure you are building 15 blocks higher than the highest point of elevation if building above ground, and the opposite for subterranean bases. I could leave the video here and call it a day now that you have all the information you need, But you know I won't leave you guys hanging without a base. Come on, you know me better than that. So here we go. I'm opting to build above ground because it is an easier base to build, and I don't want to make a complex base, you know, relatively speaking. I am still me after all. I'll start with a base full of cube blocks. I intend to build directly over this to ensure all points of my base are an even height above the ground. Since we have proven the cube 1/4 meter round shapes to be screamer proof, I want to build a circular tower. I'll outline the base of our tower and return to that momentarily. After expanding the base of our base, time to add some stairs. We'll use some inside stairs filled corner shapes, stairs filled, and the stairs filled diagonal too. Our next step will be to extend our tower up 15 blocks using the same cube 1/4 meter round shapes. This is a simple rinse and repeat process. Be right back. Within the completed tower, we'll make ourselves a ladder starting 2 blocks above the ground all the way to the top. This will be our entrance, and we are placing it 2 blocks above the ground so that zombies will not see it as a viable path to us. Ultimately, we will want them to go another way. On top of our tower, we're going to use the cube 5 meter round shapes first. Now normally, I dislike doing a horde where I store all my stuff, but if that's how you play, or you just simply want a defense for your home base, we'll cover both options with a compact, simple design. Though I'll use 5 meter round shapes first. Scratch that. 7 meter round shapes first. Want a wider base. Though I used screamer safe blocks here, I don't necessarily need to on this floor, as this is intended to be the fighting position. So since you'll be making lots of noise through the shooting or melee, kinda doesn't matter if this part is screamer proof or not. For the simple compact design, we're going to construct ladders from the bottom to the top. And unlike our personal entry ladder, this ladder fully extends to the bottom as we want zombies to path up this way. And at the top of the ladders, railing diagonal. For those that have seen our pathing shapes video or our 80 beginner building tips, this should be recognizable. I highly recommend checking those out for base ideas. Anyways, this works by tricking zombies to climb up the ladder, and upon reaching the diagonals, they attempt to climb higher and fall. We'll block off our fighting platform with ramp 6 meter shapes as they are cop spit safe, along with the cube 1/4 meter round, which are also cop spit safe. Over the fighting section roof, we'll use the wedge 60 shapes to provide cover, and we'll use a mix of cube 7 meter round shapes and full cube blocks to make our second floor. This next floor will be screamer safe, and to add a little contour while also remaining screamer safe, we'll put in some cube 3/4 shapes in the center. After building the second floor walls using the same 7 meter round shapes, time to put in some forges, storage chests, a workbench of course, and a chemistry station. Time to cover the roof with using the same blocks we've been using. I'll put in a ladder to give us access. And on top, we'll plop down some dew collectors as every home needs some water generation. And with that done, time to test out some screamers. If we quickly try out our storage chest test again, we see that screamers are completely oblivious. Let's intentionally get a screamer's attention so that we can test out the defensive feature of this base. Hit it, Taco. And there you have it. Using this information, you can go forth and easily construct a screamer-proof base and live out your days in peace. Except when you're playing the rest of the game. But you know, it is nice to have a little respite once in a while. Hope you all enjoyed this one. If you have any video suggestions, bases you want me to build, designs or game mechanics you want me to test out, shout it out in the comments below. If you stayed around this long, that must mean you enjoy our content or love to hate it. Either way, consider hitting that like button and subscribing if you aren't a part of the posse yet, as it helps our small channel out a ton. And don't forget to tap the bell for notifications so you don't miss out on our next video. Also, a huge shout out to our wonderful Patreon community. Thank you all so much for your generosity. On that note, this is Eerie Knight signing off. See you all next time.